and welcome to another episode of Widdecombe, Webb and Woberts. I'm Emma Webb and I'm joined by former Shadow Home Secretary and Brexit Party MEP Anne Widdecombe and comedian Abi Roberts. This week we have seen yet another terror attack, this time in Liverpool. The police are still trying to establish a motive. We've also seen concerns raised about the actions of Europe's last dictatorship. Austria have locked down only the unvaccinated, and we've also seen news of an app that allows people to red list those who have gender critical views. So starting in relation to the Liverpool attack, this has also come in a week when we have seen a record number of people crossing the channel. This individual, one of the things that we do know about him is that he was an asylum seeker. So just to give you the figures, on Thursday the record number that came across was 1,185 individuals, and that means that this year's count alone, vastly higher than last year, is 23,500 in 1 year alone. And the Prime Minister's spokesman has said that that is even counting the fact that 1,800 have been prevented apparently from crossing, they believe. So I know obviously you've got lots of views on this. The Border Force a couple of weeks ago was saying they were refusing to follow the Home Secretary's demands to turn the boats back in the other direction.
Well, and as I point out in my excellent column in the Express tomorrow, the retiring head of the Border Force has said that borders are a pain in the proverbial, my euphemism. And I just wonder, therefore, if that's what he thinks, whether or not he has a garden fence, whether or not he locks the door of his house, if he believes that borders are pointless. But it does certainly explain a great deal about the failures of the immigration service if there isn't that complete conviction about controlling our borders in where it actually matters most, which is amongst those who are enforcing the law.
Do you think this is one of the reasons why Priti Patel has failed so dramatically to get this under control? Because obviously today she's been saying that she wants to make sure that 100% of those coming across the channel are not able to cross. Is it the case that it's just because...
It's a bit late now.
Yeah, Anne's funny bone.
Yeah.
Is it because there are certain aspects of this, undemocratic aspects of this, that are outside of her control, in the sense I think most people would find it ridiculous that the Border Force would be able to say to the Home Secretary, no, sorry, not doing that.
Well, it raises a lot of questions about the effectiveness of the Home Secretary. I mean, if Priti Patel has said that 100% of people should not be able to cross the channel, I would be cheering if I were those people, because whenever Priti Patel says something, she doesn't do it.
Exactly.
So that means probably 100% are going to come over. I mean, it is complete nonsense coming out with these statements. Let's have some policy. Let's practice routine detention of all new asylum seekers. That is the first thing.
Yeah.
Then we know where they are. We can examine their claims, examine them properly, establish where they've come from, which often isn't where they say they've come from, and deal with it that way. So you then send out a message to the world which says, if you come to Britain with a false claim, you'll be detained, you'll be dealt with quickly, you'll be sent back. And the Justice Secretary needs to look at the appeal system, because even when we have got people ready for deportation, we only actually deport a fraction of them because all the others have put in last-minute appeals. And we just need to get on top of the system and to get some common sense into it.
Yeah.
And it isn't just the people crossing the channel. I know that's where the focus is at the moment. But every single day at Heathrow, somebody gets off a plane, having lost his or her documents in the plane's loose, stays airside for hours on end, presents at the immigration desks, and nobody's got a clue where they've come from. And they can spin any old yarn. And that's going on. People are still coming over the channel in the backs of lorries. Don't just focus on the sea crossings. They may be the most visible and most flagrant abuse of what's going on at the moment. But the entire system is riddled with failure. It's broken.
The other aspect of this, of course, is that, you know, we know that ISIS and other extremist groups do exploit migration flows. So back in, I think it was 2015, the European Parliament were discussing this research that suggested that around 5,000 terrorists, people connected to terrorist organisations, had come in through the migrant routes, attackers within Europe had been going back and forward, foreign fighters using the migrant flows in order to do that. So when we have all of these people coming into our country, and like you say, Anne, they just discard their documentation, and as in this case, one of the reasons why the attackers' asylum claim was actually thrown out was because they didn't believe that he was coming from where he said he was coming from. That if you don't know who those people are, then that is a vulnerability that is definitely going to be exploited by those people who do want to cause us harm. So it's not that it's, all of them. That's a separate issue. I think there's a separate issue about where these people being in the large part economic migrants and needing to sort the people who are genuine asylum seekers from those who are economic migrants, given that they're coming from a safe country in France. That's a separate issue. But it seems to me to be a sort of common sense issue, especially when you see, like in Lithuania, the Lithuanian authorities recently in the last week saying that a lot of these people coming over their border, they found that of a couple of thousand of them, 24 had, after a background check, they found they had extremist links to countries in the Middle East.
There is no doubt that the migrant route can be used by terrorists, but actually you do have to ask yourself, why bother when actually we've got homegrown terrorists? Not everybody who's convicted of terrorism or is suspected of terrorism is being monitored for terrorism. Not everybody has come in. I mean, a lot of them are born here.
Yes.
We've got a homegrown problem as well.
Yes. Patrick Christie's made this point in his monologue on GB News that we're also teaching in our schools a very negative perception of Britain and British history. So
we're doing
if you
that.
do have, one of the other aspects of this argument is that you could have people coming across who haven't actually entered illegally with the intention to cause harm, but once they get here, that is the point at which they take on some of these ideas. They could be getting it from homegrown preachers. We've got plenty of our own that they could be getting these ideas from, and so that once they get here, if they're involved in the education system in any way, they're being fed all of these ideas that are very anti-British. And if you create a toxic fusion between that and Islamist ideas and Islamist ideology that they might come into contact with, even once they're here, if they haven't already come into contact with it in their country of origin or on the journey on the way here, that is also an aspect of this, that we're teaching all this negativity in our schools.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I don't think there's anything to disagree with.
Yeah.
So going back to this attacker, Abby, you already mentioned that he converted to Christianity. The Telegraph earlier published a really interesting report suggesting that there were concerns that had been raised that Liverpool Cathedral, which is the cathedral that he converted through, so this guy, he came here in 2014, he had his asylum claim rejected in 2014 and then was sectioned under the Mental Health Act in 2014-2015
for carrying a knife,
for brandishing a knife in central Liverpool. And then some years later in 2017, he did the Alpha course, which is a 5-week course to become a Christian, and then converted through a Liverpool Cathedral. So some people have raised concerns that Liverpool Cathedral is being exploited by asylum seekers who want to further their application by showing that they have integrated by converting to Christianity, or one of the other suggestions in the article is very interesting, that they'd be less likely to be sent back to their country of origin if they're a Christian because they could be persecuted there. So this goes back to what you were saying, Anne, about the fact that it's very difficult to remove people once they're here. And so someone who'd actually converted there previously had said that they had previously raised concerns that they thought that this was being exploited by Muslims, not from obviously people who already had citizenship here, but they pointed out that all of these hundreds who had converted through the cathedral were those who were in the process of making asylum applications.
I mean, don't let's again conflate that necessarily with terrorism. People want to maximise their chances of asylum just as prisoners want to maximise their chances of release, and every prison chaplain will tell you that yes, they get genuine converts every single year, but they also get an awful lot who are using it for convenience, who think that will enhance their chances of parole or of release, or sometimes just frankly relieve boredom because it's something else to do. And an asylum seeker will always be looking for how to maximise a claim. And if there is, in his genuine country of origin, because as I say, half the time we don't know where they come from, if in his genuine country of origin there is a record of persecution of Christians, then that is a very obvious route to take. So I have no doubt at all that in that number of people who go through the offer course at Liverpool, there will be people who are perfectly genuine, and there will be people who are using it as just an extra string to their bow in their asylum application. So I don't think that's rocket science. I really don't.
So I guess the question, though, is that if it can be exploited by people who want to further their asylum application, could it also be exploited? Now, we don't know in the case of this attacker, but could it also be exploited as I mentioned to you before we started filming, there's an ISIS manual called Safety and Security Guidelines for Lone Wolf Mujahideen that recommends that people do various things to try and put the security services off the scent. Things like having conversations about terror attacks within nightclubs, so that they can't. It's an unlikely place for them.
I've always
to be,
wondered, how do you train to be a suicide bomber if you've only got one? So anyway,
and so
let's move on swiftly.
Safety and security for a suicide bomber seems to be a rather odd concept. But anyway,
you've only got one chance. Oh, never mind.
So I guess the question is, could this also be exploited by people who are extremists and want to use converting to Christianity as a cover? It happened in 2017, though, so it's been quite a lot of time has elapsed.
Well, of course, I mean, that's what spies would do, of course, because you try and blend in, don't you?
You hide in plain sight.
Yeah, hide in plain sight, exactly. And I think it's naive. This is why it worries me that the press was so sort of dismissive of Liverpool. I just thought, my God, I mean, that was a car bomb. That was the kind of thing I don't think we've ever seen that, have we, on our soil? Apart from maybe in Northern Ireland.
I think we have, yeah.
Apart from Northern Ireland. Yeah. But not that should have been literally what came out of the Prime Minister's mouth at the presser was, right, everyone, all hands on deck. And instead he was just wishy-washy about the green movement. I mean, what the hell are you doing?
Hang on, all hands on deck to do what?
All hands on deck to... Well, actually, that's a good question, because... I mean,
when we get on the deck, what do you want us to do?
to assert Judeo-Christianity again?
Well, I do that every day.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you do, but I mean, it's absurd that we've got people in this country like us who will talk about it, but they'll never really sort of step up to the plate. And so that's what we need to do. Because, of course, once we've established
what do we need to do? I want to know...
Keep calm and carry on, I guess.
What we need to do to prevent a car bomb. What do we need to do? And the answer is there's precious little we can do if people are determined.
Yes.
It's interesting, actually, this because he used TATP, which is an explosive that was also used by the Parsons Green bomber and has been used by... I mean, it's one of the favoured. It's extremely volatile, so that's the reason why they use it. But it's interesting because I think we've all become, and this sounds absolutely mad, but we've all become accustomed to stabbings and car rammings, haven't we? It feels like it's been quite some time since somebody actually used an IED in that way in a central area like Liverpool.
Yeah. I mean, it's extraordinary to me that this is happening. I mean, I do want to say, try and be positive and say something, but I think it's 25 years too late. I think Tony Blair said, "Come on in, everyone," and didn't say we're proud to be a Judeo-Christian country, and if you come in, you have British values first. That's what happened. We didn't have a leader. We didn't have someone in charge like Anne, who I know would have, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely.
You would have done.
But the fact is...
And not been ashamed of it.
But actually, to be perfectly fair with Tony Blair, what he did, and what was totally wrong, was with regards to Eastern European migration.
Yes.
When every other country in the European Union, every other country except the Republic of Ireland and ourselves, took quotas for 7 years. And he said, no quotas are necessary. And when challenged, and it's there on the record, he said, only about 25,000 will want to come.
Yes.
Well, that was his assessment that over 7 years, only 25,000 people were going to come.
I mean, how naive, exactly, to say, come to look at this wonderful country that's a soft touch. Of course people won't try and come in. Yeah, I mean, really, he has a lot, and he's still lurking. He was at the Cenotaph, looking like the sort of literally like the devil.
Former prime ministers are entitled to be at the Cenotaph.
Yes, I know.
Don't let's get too neurotic.
But I mean, he's got such an evil, dark soul. It was actually sort of it was coming out of his face It really was. Sorry,
And
I don't know if you gathered. I'm not a Tony Blair fan.
I'm going to use the mention of the cenotaph to segue onto the subject of war.
Oh no!
I mentioned already the border in Lithuania having some illegal migrants passing through, but I wanted to talk to you about what is widely
Passing
referred
through.
to now as Europe's last dictatorship, Belarus, or Beirut, as it has been referred to by certain distinguished members of parliament.
Yes, Claudia.
So the leader of Belarus, Lukashenko, has been essentially weaponising the migrant flow by shepherding them towards, bringing them in, I believe also by plane, bringing them in and shepherding them towards the Polish border and then causing havoc. And there were some reports of members, I think it was of the Belarusian military, going around and telling the migrants men to clip the wire to try and essentially storm into Poland. And they were sort of marching women and children, I think, at the head of this column towards the, which just sounds very, very immoral stuff. So the purpose seems to be, as it's been reported, the purpose is revenge for the sanctions that the European Union have put on Belarus for their 2020 election being rigged. And I imagine a number of other bad, naughty things that Belarus have done. I'm understating quite dramatically. And so, but it seems to be tied up with Russian politics as well. Obviously, Lukashenko has Putin's backing. He's also been threatening to turn off the gas supply through the pipes that run through
Gazprom,
Belarus, which would not make Putin happy. And also, there have been reports of troops again amassing on the border of Ukraine. So the reason why I wanted to discuss this with you is because there have been some writers, people like the historian Mark Armand, who have raised concerns about the implications of this for stability in Europe, and some people suggesting, very balanced in people, commentators and writers in the press, saying that they're concerned that this could very easily tip into some kind of active engagement, to describe it euphemistically.
Very much so.
I think Putin is too rational to allow that. I don't think Lukashenko is remotely rational. A bit like I don't think North Korea is remotely rational. But I think Putin, at the end of it all, after much posturing, is actually rational. And he is not going to want that scenario that you've just painted.
No.
And I think that, frankly, is our best hope.
Do you think that as some people have suggested, that this whole situation in Belarus is a distraction to distract people from what's going on the border of Ukraine?
Maybe.
It's a little bit Machiavellian. And carries such obvious dangers with it, as I say, which I think Putin will put a stop to when he has to.
There's a strange mirror. Sorry, Andrew, I remember. There's a strange mirroring, if my history is right, that it's interesting that they're pushing all the migrants towards the Poles, because from my distant memory of history, in the Ottoman Empire, it was the Poles who saved us from. I mean, it saved us from the barbarians at the gate. So the Poles are not going to have any of this. I don't think.
If you were Home Secretary, what would your approach to this be? Because obviously Liz Truss, I think there are plans for Liz Truss to hold
Foreign Secretary.
some talks. Sorry, Foreign Secretary, of course. If you were Foreign Secretary, what would your sort of approach to this be?
My approach to this would be overtly that Lukashenko should stop, and that the situation, if it deteriorates, could become extremely grave. And that the EU should act, and that Poland should act, short of military confrontation. But behind the scenes, what I would be doing would be talking to Putin.
Do you think?
I agree.
Do you think that all of the stuff around COP26 has been for our government a sort of like that it shows that their priorities are not in order, that we have serious geopolitical issues like this taking place? The Balkans have always been a kind of flashpoint within Europe as a source of instability, that they've taken their eye off of all of the balls that matter, and
apart from Ed,
and have become completely distracted by this, and actually maybe taking actions that could destabilise Europe further, like, for example, our dependency on gas supplies from Russia, that they are not encouraging countries to take these green initiatives and so on, that will possibly make them more dependent on other nations for energy supplies.
I was saying to Anne, COP26 will turn out, I think, to be they've shot themselves in the foot, because everyone now is saying, what a waste of money, how dreadful, very dismissive. And now are looking to, as Anne's rightly pointed out many times, the alternative climate theories, which I think is not what Boris Johnson, or not what anyone wanted.
It's not what he wanted, and it's not what I'm sure the powers of be will permit very easily. I'm quite certain of that.
Yes.
Heretical views can be taken down from Facebook. They can be taken down from YouTube.
Twitter.
Twitter, etc. And I'm sure that it's not a debate that will be encouraged. But I think what people do think about COP is, it was a load of hypocrisy with people trailing clouds of emissions while lecturing the rest of us. But secondly, that it was all a mammoth fudge. I mean, you're going to phase coal down, not out. Well, what a
terrible
joke.
Yeah, exactly.
Hasn't China also, since making this agreement with the US, just upped its coal output?
Yeah. Because they've got people to feed and keep warm. They're not going to listen to somebody saying, should we have a windmill that's just in the centre of town? That'll keep us all.
But do you think that they are sort of unserious in the way that they are focusing on these sorts of things whilst ignoring some serious other issues that are going on that could cause, as Mark Arman pointed out in his very good article on this, I think it was in the Daily Mail, that could pose a much more imminent risk for the stability in Europe than climate change?
I don't think they're deliberately ignoring those things. I really don't. I mean, I think if you were a mouse under the table at Downing Street, you would hear what is going on in the Balkans discussed really quite exhaustively.
If Larry the cat hadn't got you.
If Larry the cat hadn't got you. Well, he never did. I mean, just curled up and slept. So when he wasn't attacking Freya next door, he was sort of curled up asleep. So, I don't think you can accuse them of ignoring it, but certainly COP26 has been a distraction. But it's been planned for a very, very long time. This is COP27, etc. It's not just, we're suddenly going to do this and we're not looking at anything else. It's just the timings. So I wouldn't actually accuse them of not taking seriously other things, but I think they take far too seriously Britain's contribution of 1%. To the emissions that they're trying to stop. And so long as China and India, and actually the sun itself, make their contribution.
No one mentions the sun.
As I think I've said before, to worry about a 1%, you might as well say, I've thrown a sugar cube in Loch Ness and the waters are sweet.
Yes.
You might just as well say that.
Something else that's been mentioned this week is also China's relationship with Taiwan, and President Biden having conversations with Xi Jinping about the future of Taiwan and essentially,
you know where Taiwan is?
You can point to it on a map.
No,
like Beirut. We're back to Beirut. The China are essentially telling America to back off when it comes to protecting Taiwan's sovereignty. How concerned are you about China and Russia after Afghanistan? Obviously China has interests in the region. Russia is obviously flexing itself via Beirut. I've started calling it Beirut. Via Beirut, and on the border of Ukraine. How concerned are you about how this might develop? Because now obviously people are saying this is a historic change in the balance of power towards China away from the United States.
Which always happens under a
that
Democrat.
will obviously have serious geopolitical implications also for Russia and its relationship with Europe.
And with a Democrat president, it always happens that China, Iran, and China, Iran, and Russia are the things that Democratic presidents always seem to get wrong. Historically, Carter did.
Well, yeah, I think this president isn't there anyway. So,
he doesn't know where he is.
Sleepy Joe.
I think the president of the Western world, the leader of the Western world, is senile.
Sorry to change the subject. What's Kamala Harris up to? We never really see her.
Well, I hope she's up to nothing at all.
Yes, exactly.
Gets wrong.
Yeah.
So I hope she's up to nothing at all. But on the wider point that you make, China has broken its agreements over Hong Kong, and there is nothing that we can do about it.
Yeah.
And if it does decide to annex Taiwan, to put it very, very bluntly, there is nothing we can do about it.
Because we gave Hong Kong back.
Well, we gave Hong Kong back, but
we talked about that before.
But I mean, I'm talking about China's influence in general.
Yeah.
You know, we do not want a military confrontation. They do not apply the same rules as most countries apply, and they are prepared to break the rules. And therefore, it is a tense situation, and it is a dangerous one. But in the end, I come back to rationality. Those countries are not going to go up against each other in a military confrontation, and we will pontificate and we will huff and puff, and we may even impose a sanction or two, but we won't do much beyond that, and they won't listen. But what they won't do is cross that vital line.
But isn't that quite horrifying, given the nature of the Chinese Communist Party, the way that they run the country, and also the fact that now they're
and they disregard,
in terms of military, their technology and cyber warfare, all sorts of areas, they're completely outflanking the United States. That we've spoken about this before in terms of, you know, appeasement in comparison to historical comparisons with the Second World War. Like, at what point do you decide we can no longer talk in terms of diplomacy, but at some point you may have to push back in a military way, which is what the United States is saying, that they would back Taiwan, and this is what has got China's backup. Because actually the US has a very contradictory policy when it comes to Taiwan and China. But is that not very worrying, that we wouldn't be able to do anything to stop China from invading Taiwan, and that they know that?
Of course it's worrying. Of course it's worrying. But I'm just facing the facts of life. But what I'm saying is that I don't think this is a question of appeasement or getting tough. In 1938 and 1939, when we were pursuing a policy of appeasement, we didn't have nukes. There is a huge limitation where you've got rational regimes, and again, I think Xi Jinping is rational. Horrible, but rational. Where you've got rationality, you are not going to actually get the sort of military step to which would pit America against China, which would be Armageddon. You're not going to get that. So if I were asked, do I think the future of Taiwan is safe? The answer is no. Do I think it will lead to a worldwide military confrontation? The answer is no. Do I think that in the end we're going to have to go down the diplomatic and trade routes? The answer is yes.
But do you think that we should just be accepting?
I'm not saying accept.
No, but should we be accepting that the century to come is going to be dominated by China, and that there is nothing that we can do about it? Or should we be thinking, how can we and other allies, Australia, the United States, actually meet the challenge that China poses by this shift in power, and try to pull some of that power back to the democratic West?
We could meet the challenge if the West weren't so obsessed with pronouns, you know, painting zebra crossings in pink and blue.
The Chinese must love all of that.
Yeah, literally, it is Xi Jinping. I call it the ping-demic. You know, back when it was named after him. But in all seriousness, we're so upset, we're so navel-gazing that actually it's. You know, that's why this is happening, because nobody's saying, hang on a minute, forget your he, she, it, them.
Okay, all that
China's
is true.
On the door.
All that is quite true.
Yeah.
But you come back to the question of what are we actually going to do about it? Now, you know, I go back to the Cold War. I'm even old enough to remember it. I remember the Russian tanks rolling into Prague. We huffed, we puffed, we got very, very indignant. We did nothing. We did nothing.
Yeah.
We didn't do anything during the Hungarian uprising. We didn't do anything during the Polish uprising. We did nothing. We huffed and puffed. But despite the fact that we did nothing, we nevertheless were very, very strong about defending NATO. And actually, if you ask me where the real danger lies, I think it's deserting NATO for the European army, which looks as if is what we're going to be doing. But we were very strong about NATO, and because they were rational, the Russians did not invade NATO countries. They understood. They understood that there was a line they couldn't cross.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think very much the same thing would apply to reasoning within China.
Yeah.
So apparently one of the reasons why Russia may have been motivated to annex Ukraine, part of Ukraine, even though obviously it's because they want the whole of Ukraine and greater Russia, as it were, was because they wanted to stop Ukraine from being able to join NATO because they can't join if they've got a border dispute. Timing of it.
Yeah, that's certainly effective timing. I've no doubt about that. Because if the Ukraine application to join NATO had went ahead and was successful and it became part of NATO, then if the Russians had put one big toe inside its borders, the Pentagon would have been involved.
Should NATO just waive the requirement of not having a border dispute for Ukraine and allow them to join anyway?
We can't do that. I love the simplicity of it, and I love the idea, and I would love to be cheeky and do it. But I think one has to face reality in it. It is not a NATO country, and therefore Section 5, which is the one under which we all have to intervene if we're asked, doesn't apply.
And also don't forget that many Ukrainians consider themselves Russian as well. There are lots of people who culturally are loyal to Putin.
Yeah,
not
culturally that is true.
Yeah. So that's a strange dilemma to have.
I don't think we're going to solve the world's problems.
No, the thing that worries me, worries me, of course, worries me more than anything. We're going back to the culture question. Is we shared culture with our enemies in 38, 39. With China, though, we've taken on their culture of things like lockdowns, the way that they reacted to the coronavirus, which didn't happen before. And I think that's an interesting. I
was just sitting here thinking, I can't come up with a clever segue for the next section of this, but you've just led me straight.
That's the kind of girl I am. I love a good segue.
It's one of the running jokes, Anne. So I thought we should also talk about the obvious, which is the fact that Austria have announced a lockdown for only those who are unvaccinated. But what's particularly interesting about this is the whole discussion that has taken place around it, because those who have been criticising it for being unethical and for simply not making any scientific sense, people like Laura Dodsworth and also Tonya Buxton. Laura Dodsworth has also made this point, which is that those people who have been criticising it are being described in the press as being anti-vax, even though they're not necessarily anti-vax. Many of them are people who explicitly, like Sam Smith, who was on Ian Dale's show on LBC, she is vaccinated, she's getting her booster, she's pro-vaccine, but she doesn't agree with the ethics or the efficacy of locking down only the unvaccinated. And Laura Dodsworth has made the point that this is not about public health, that it's punitive. But the people, what I find most remarkable is the viciousness of those who are critical of the people who are questioning the ethics of this. So Ian Dale, who I already mentioned, responding to Tonya Buxton, who was making some of these criticisms of the science behind locking down only the unvaccinated. Ian Dale replied to her on Twitter saying, this direct quote, "Of course I understand that," relating to her point, "but it reduces the probability of transmission or infection. That's the point. But people like you can't get it into your thick little skulls. So blinded are you by the anti-vaccine cult that you so blindly adhere to."
Come on.
Dreadful man.
I mean, I keep making this. I've made it often in my excellent column in the Express. I keep making this point. You have two people in a room. One's vaccinated fully. One is unvaccinated. Who is in the more danger? The unvaccinated one. Because whereas if you're vaccinated, you've got the protection, you're not going to get it badly. Statistically speaking, you're not going to get it very badly. So if you get it, you'll be able to brush it off. But if the unvaccinated person gets it, she doesn't have that protection. So she or he is much more in danger from you than you are from that person. So why don't we lock down all the vaccinated people? That would make a lot more sense.
This is another reason why it doesn't make any sense, right? So the list of things that they're allowed to do, they're allowed to go to work, they're allowed to do essential shopping, they're allowed to do outdoor exercise, meet a partner, do anything that is related to religious needs. So what this clearly is just and also they're allowed to go out to be vaccinated. So what this clearly is,
it's punitive.
Given the fines, I don't know if you've seen the fines, between 500 and 3,600 euros as a fine for leaving your house during the lockdown without one of these legitimate reasons. And apparently, The Guardian reported that police today have been carrying out routine checks on commuters.
They do.
To check that they...
I've seen the footage.
Yeah, and so this seems to be nothing to do with public health. It is just pure and simple, because what they're really saying is that if you want to leave your house and lead a normal life, then you have to go and get vaccinated.
Yes.
Well, I didn't know.
What the hell's going on?
Well, what's going on is that normal values have been turned upside down.
Yes, they have.
And what's turned them upside down?
Well, what's turned them upside down, and I've said this many times, is a very small minority of extremely vocal keyboard warriors who appear to have got the entire establishment, including the government, kowtowing to them.
Yes.
And that's the bit I don't understand. It's not that we've got a lot of lunatics. It's that actually the establishment is going along with it. Now, you'll say it's the long march through the institutions.
No. Not in this case. I think it is the establishment.
Well, it takes a few bad words on Twitter and any institution immediately gets worried.
But also, I mean, how interesting. I mean, the banality of evil. You know, where have we heard that phrase before? Because if enough people are fearful and enough people go, you know, the curtain twitchers go, oh dear, he hasn't had a vax, she hasn't had a vaccination either. I'll tell you what, let's call the police and go around with, you know, eventually...
I think I know that person.
Do you know that person? You know, I'm sorry, but that is human nature. That is how fascism, the Nazi party succeeded, by people going... Wow, she hasn't. Yeah, Mao's China. I mean, this is all sort of should be so obvious to people. I don't know why.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to put to you this story that was in the Critic about an app called Shinigami Eyes. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Shinigami Eyes. Now, Shinigami Eyes comes from manga and anime. These.
Japanese.
I'm going to attempt to explain this to Anne without having any idea really what they are myself. They're like a kind of cartoon. They are, aren't they?
Yeah.
Like comic books and films. And apparently Shinigami Eyes means having the ability to see people's names and remaining lifespan just by looking at them. So this app, apparently, this is a quote because I feel I need to quote them directly on this. The app allows you to see a person's trans acceptance orientation just by looking at them. And the app was created by a trans person called Lorelei Bailey, who had already contributed to some software called Turf Tracker, and that's essentially what this is.
Me and Anne will be picked up.
Well, actually, you could get this a browser extension and find out if you are red listed, because it gives you.
I'll definitely
got it as a badge of honour.
Yeah, me too.
It gives you, although you would be in the company of Jess Phillips. I had to check there because I'm forever confusing it with Angela Rayner. But what this app, browser extension does is it gives you the ability to. Either through user contributions or through algorithms, it red lists or green lists people according to... So as soon as you see a person, you would know what their views are on trans. Red for danger, green for safe. And red obviously is applied to people with gender critical views, or just the views that most people hold.
Yeah.
And it's followed on Twitter by an admissions officer from Bradford University.
Yeah.
Which you can see the implications of that, what that could be.
Yeah.
A senator for students at the Labour Party, and a journalist.
Sorry, senator for students. Senator.
That's what it said in the article. I'm not sure really what that is.
Yeah.
But people that are listed as red on this include people like Mary Harrington, who's just wonderful, Julie Bindel, Janet Street Porter, Dominique Samuels,
J.K. Rowling,
probably
all my
both of
heroines
you as well.
Yeah.
And Jess Phillips is on the list because the journalist who wrote this article looked up on a forum to see why the users of this app had listed Jess Phillips in the red, because that would seem to be quite remarkable.
Yeah.
It was actually because she had read out a list of women's names, women who had been murdered in Parliament, and she excluded from that list trans women, and that was the reason why she'd been given the red
by
list.
default.
But the reason why I raise this is because there's an organisation called Electronic Frontier Norway, which is apparently a group that is concerned with liberties relating to things online. And they think that this violates Article 6 of GDPR, because it lists people's political views and convictions, and they think therefore it poses a threat to liberty. So I raise this because I know that you're both interested in the case of Catherine Stock, Kathleen Stock, sorry, because she was essentially hounded out of her university, intimidated and threatened and all sorts, because of her academic interests that are, I suppose you would broadly say, gender critical views, not anti-trans by any means. And I wanted to put this to you, how much of a risk you think it poses to women who hold these views, that software like this exists to categorise people in line in this way.
I suppose there could be an element of risk there. I mean, there always is. If you're known for a particular view or something like that, probably the people most at risk are not the Kathleen Stocks and the Abi Robertses of this world. They're probably ordinary people who have fallen foul of them by making some comment, a teacher or somebody like that.
Yeah.
They're far more likely to be at risk. But this is just an extension of what's been going on anyway.
Yeah.
It's almost to be welcomed in as much as it has quite suddenly become overt.
Yes.
Here is our list.
Yes, exactly. Making lists.
Do you think things like this will, and there was a comment piece in the Telegraph about this, whether the sort of woke pendulum will swing back in the other direction?
I hope so.
Do you think that things like this, that categorise people like Jess Phillips as being in the red zone, that this will actually make people think, actually, this is a bit balmy, and it is quite sinister, and because I'm now affected by it too, or could potentially be affected by it, that... Do you think it will make people self-censor more, or do you think it will make people think, actually, no, this is all going far too far?
But I think they already think that. I mean, I think the way that J.K. Rowling was treated, and to a lesser extent Germaine Greer, and people of that sort, I think people are already pushing back against. I mean, there is a visible pushback, which there isn't in most things.
Yeah.
But that pushback at the moment is pretty fragile.
It's
because
pretty fragile.
Where is Kathleen Stock? She's no longer at Sussex University.
Yes.
Despite the fact that in that case the university did actually stick up for her.
Yeah.
Although a little too late in the
day. To make it.
Do you know something? I did a gig a few weeks ago where the audience, because it's just reminded me of the red and green, were divided into green stickers for you want to be spoken to by the comedian, orange stickers.
I thought you were about to say in general, not just from other human beings. I'm not ready yet.
No one ever talks to me. And then
I'm in a social lockdown.
Orange stickers don't want to have any interaction in the audience. So you look out and you think,
so you have to talk to that person.
No, I can't talk to. I mean, absurd.
Absolutely
that's the woke.
Mad.
That's what people are doing to comedy.
Well, that's a really weird note to end on. Thank you, Abi. Thank you, Anne. Please comment, like, subscribe if you feel that way inclined, and join us next time on Widdecombe, Webb and Woberts.